I died at 35 with tubes in my arms and no one holding my hand. Then I opened my eyes, and the smell was wrong. No antiseptic and sterile sheets, just gasoline, motor oil, and the faint sweetness of old coffee left on a burner too long. I was lying on a cot in the back of a repair shop, my hands covered in grease I hadn't earned yet, my body 20 years younger, and pulsing with a kind of raw energy you only appreciate after you've watched yourself waste away to nothing. I sat up slowly, testing the weight of my own limbs, and pain, and exhaustion, and tumor pressing against my ribs like a fist trying to punch its way out. Just me. 20 years old, calloused hands, and a life I'd already lived once. The first time around, I made every mistake a man could make. I let rage steer the ship. I let the hunger for belonging blind me to the cost of admission. I clawed my way back into a family that never wanted me, spent years competing with a ghost who'd been loved without trying, and died alone in a hospital bed with a phone that didn't ring. Not this time. I heard the car before I saw it, military plates, the kind that doesn't get ticketed. The engine was too smooth for this neighborhood, too polished for a street lined with pawn shops and laundromats that hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. I walked to the front of the shop, wiping my hands on a rag that was more oil than fabric, and watched a couple step out of a black sedan. Richard Collins, Amanda Collins, my biological parents. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the posture of a man who'd spent his life giving orders and expecting them to be followed. Military through and through, you could see it in the way he scanned the street before he even looked at me, assessing threats that didn't exist. She was softer, dressed in clothes that cost more than the shop made in a month, her eyes already wet before she'd taken 3 steps toward the garage door. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I'd lived it before. Amanda Collins reached me first, her hand hovering near my face like she wanted to touch me, but wasn't sure I was real. "Tyler," she breathed. "We found you. We finally found you." Richard hung back, his jaw tight, the kind of man who'd rather fight a war than have a conversation about feelings. "We've been looking for 20 years, he said. "We didn't know. The hospital. They told us you died. We were told you didn't survive." I remembered this part too. The story they'd been told. The story they believed without question because it was easier than the alternative. I looked at Amanda Collins, my mother, in a technical sense, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "You were told wrong," I said. "Obviously." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "We can explain," she said quickly. "There were so many obstacles. We hired private investigators, but..." 20 years, I interrupted. "You didn't think to check the foster system? The adoption records? Or did you just sign some paperwork and decide it was easier to move on?" Richard's face darkened. "You don't understand the situation. We were young. We were told you didn't survive. We grieved you." I looked at him. The righteous anger I had carried the first time around was still there, somewhere underneath the surface, but I'd learned something important about that anger. It burned hottest when I was feeding it. And I was done feeding it. "Okay," I said. "So now you know I'm alive. You can go." Amanda's composure cracked. "Tyler, please. We want you to come home. We have so much to give you. Your brother." "Not my brother," I said flatly. "Nathaniel, the kid you raised while I was in foster care. The one who got your name, your money, your attention, that's your son. I'm just the biological discrepancy you're trying to fix." Richard stepped forward, his voice hardening into the tone he probably used on subordinates who weren't falling in line fast enough. "You're being unreasonable that we came here to make things right. You're Collins. That means something." "It means nothing to me." I turned back toward the shop, toward the grease and the broken engines and the man who'd actually raised me. Ed Foster, 56 years old, missing 2 fingers from a saw accident in his 20s, who'd found me in a dumpster when I was 6 and never once made me feel like I owed him for it. He was in the back, pretending not to listen, but I saw the way his shoulders relaxed when I didn't follow the Collinses out to their sedan. Amanda called after me. "Your grandmother, she'd want to meet you. She's not well. Please, Tyler, just give us a chance." I stopped at the door, my hand on the frame. I remembered my grandmother from the first life. She'd been the only one who looked at me without pity or calculation. She died 3 years after I came back to the family, and I'd never forgiven myself for not spending more time with her. But that was the trap, wasn't it? They'd use her as leverage because they knew I couldn't say no to the one person who'd been genuinely kind. "Send me her address," I said without turning around. "I'll visit her, but I'm not coming to your house. I'm not joining your family. You made your choices 20 years ago, and the people you chose got to be your family, and I made mine a long time ago, and he's in the back of the shop." Richard's voice was cold. "You'll regret this when you're older, when you realize what you threw away." I almost laughed. I'd already lived that regret. I'd already watched it eat me alive, watched it turn into bitterness that poisoned every relationship I tried to build. I'd thrown myself into their world and won every battle they put in front of me, only to realize I'd lost the only war that mattered, the one for my own soul. "I can live with that," I said. They didn't leave immediately. I heard them arguing in low voices outside, Amanda crying, Richard trying to maintain control, neither of them capable of seeing the situation from my perspective. They'd spent 20 years believing I was dead, and now they expected me to be grateful for their guilt. I didn't know them gratitude. I didn't know them anything. Finally, the car door slammed, the engine started, and they drove away. I went back inside and found Ed watching me with a kind of quiet understanding that only comes from a man who seemed too much to be surprised by anything. "They seemed pretty well off," he said. "You sure about this?" I sat down on a crate and looked at my hands. 20 years old again. Calloused, scarred, strong. "I'm sure. Boy like you could have a lot more than this." "Maybe." I looked up at him. "But I don't want it. I want to fix engines and sleep in a cot and not have to prove myself to people who've already made up their minds about who I am. That's enough." Ed was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way he did when he decided something important. Then stay, he said. But you're getting a raise. That oil change special you came up with has been bringing in more business than I've seen in 5 years. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed, really laughed in years, even if those years hadn't technically happened yet. 3 days later, a red Mustang pulled up to the shop, and I knew the next phase of my previous life was about to play out. Nathaniel Collins stepped out of the driver's seat, wearing a shirt that cost more than my monthly rent and a smirk that cost even more. He'd been raised with every advantage. Private schools, foreign vacations, a mother who loved him, and a father who, while distant, at least recognized his existence. He'd grown up in the family that should have been mine, and he never once questioned whether he deserved it. I remembered hating him. I remembered wanting to tear his life apart with my bare hands. But standing here now, watching him swagger through the garage door with that same look of entitled superiority that had driven me mad the first time around, I didn't feel hate. I felt something closer to pity. Nathaniel was so secure in his place that he genuinely believed no one could take it from him. That was his weakness. He'd never had to fight for anything. He'd never been told no. And now that I was here, proof that his entire life was built on a mistake, he was terrified. He just didn't know how to show it except through aggression. So you're the guy, he said, stopping in front of me. My parents have been crying for 3 days. You'd think someone died. Someone did, I said evenly, just not the person they wanted. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. Look, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make you an offer. Whatever it takes for you to stay away, name your price. I leaned back against the workbench. Your parents already offered me money. I told them I didn't want it. So, what do you want? Revenge? To take my life because you think it should have been yours. Your life. I shook my head. I don't want your life. I don't want your parents. I don't want your money or your house or your future. What makes you think I'd want any of that? He blinked, genuinely thrown by that response to I and his world. Everyone wanted what he had. Everyone was scheming to get closer to his family, his connections, his inheritance. The idea that someone might genuinely not care was outside his frame of reference. Then why did you even talk to them, he demanded. They found me, I said. I didn't ask for this any more than you did. Nathaniel's fists clenched. That's the problem. You keep saying you don't want anything, but you're still here. You're still a threat. To what? To your sense of security. Good. You should feel threatened, because if I'd wanted to take your life, Nathaniel, I could have. Easily did I know things about your parents that you don't. I know the story they tell themselves about how I died is a convenient lie, but I'm not going to expose them because I don't care enough to bother. He stared at me, trying to process what I just said. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, the same calculation I'd made 100 times in my first life. How much does he know, and what does it mean for me? I don't believe you, he said finally. You're playing some kind of long game. You're going to take everything from me. That's what people like you do. People like me? I repeated. You mean people who grew up in foster care? People who had to learn how to fix engines because they didn't have trust funds to fall back on? Yeah, we're definitely the ones to watch out for, not the people who got everything handed to them and still couldn't manage a single honest day's work. Nathaniel's face went red. He stepped forward, ready to throw a punch, and I watched him do it without moving. The first time around, I'd fought him. I'd ended up on the ground, covered in grease and humiliation, and everyone in the garage had seen exactly who I was, a scared kid pretending he wasn't scared. This time, I just held his gaze and said, "Go ahead, Nathaniel, hit me, but you and I both know who'll win that fight." His fist stopped an inch from my face. I could feel the wind from the motion, the heat of his anger, but he didn't follow through because he saw it in my eyes. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of anything he could do to me. That scared him more than any threat ever could. "Stay away from my family," he growled, stepping back, "or I'll make you sorry you were ever born." "They're not your family," I said quietly. "They're just the ones who got to raise you. There's a difference." He left after that, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. I watched his Mustang peel out of the parking lot, leaving tire marks on the asphalt, and I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The first time around, Nathaniel had been a constant source of tension. Every interaction was a battle. Every family dinner was a war. I'd spent years trying to prove I was better than him, trying to earn the love he'd never had to ask for, and it had broken me. Not because he was better than me, he wasn't, but because I'd let him live rent-free in my head for 2 decades. This time, he was just a kid with a problem, a kid who'd been blindsided by the revelation that his entire identity was borrowed. He was lashing out because he was scared, and his fear had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own insecurity. I could afford to be generous about that. I didn't have to prove anything to him anymore. Ed came out of the back, wiping his hands on a rag. "That was one of them?" he asked. "Yeah, Nathaniel, the brother I never asked for." It nodded slowly. "He's going to be a problem, isn't he?" "He's going to try," I said. "But I've already been through that war, and I'm not interested in fighting it again." 2 weeks later, I was on a bus heading to the recruitment office. I'd spent every spare moment studying for the ASVAB, poring over materials I'd already mastered in the first life, but this time I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I was doing it to make sure I qualified out on my own, without a general pulling strings on my behalf. The first time around, Richard had used his influence to get me a slot in the military. I'd been handed a position I hadn't earned, and I'd spent the rest of my career trying to prove I deserved it. I'd worked harder than anyone. I'd earned medals I'd never wanted, and done things I still couldn't talk about. But none of it had ever felt like mine, because I'd started from a place of charity, not merit. This time, I wanted to start from nothing. No connections, no family name, just my hands and my head and the knowledge that I'd built this from scratch. The recruitment office was busier than I expected. A dozen other young men sat in plastic chairs, waiting for their names to be called. I filled out the forms carefully, double-checking every box, and when they sent me to the medical exam, I passed through each station with the kind of efficiency that comes from having done it once before. I'd had good health at 20, and the first life. I'd been strong, healthy. I'd never known how fragile it all was until the cancer took it away from me, piece by piece, until I had nothing left to give. So when the doctor told me my lungs were clear, and my heart was strong, and my blood work was perfect, I didn't take it for granted that I smiled. Because this body had been through hell already, and it deserved the chance to live. The ASVAB was next that I scored in the 95th percentile. The recruiter looked at my numbers, then looked at me again, clearly not expecting the grease-stained kid from the auto shop to have test scores like that. These are pretty strong, he said. You thinking about going into a technical field? Mechanic, maybe? I shook my head. I want infantry, then try out for special forces. The recruiter raised an eyebrow. You know how competitive that is? I know. Any family in the military? No, I said. Not that I'm claiming. He nodded, making a note. Well, with scores like these, you can write your own ticket. You sure about infantry? You could do just about anything. I'm sure. He looked at me for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his professional detachment. All right, sign here. I signed. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt like I'd done something that was mine and mine alone. The background check came back flagged. I found out from a phone call 3 weeks after I'd signed my enlistment papers. A lieutenant named Thomas Bennett, the man who'd been assigned to my case, asked me to come to the recruitment office for a routine discussion. When I got there, he was waiting in a small room with a manila folder on the table between them. The folder was thin. I'd hoped it would stay that way. There's an issue with your file, Bennett said, his voice careful. Apparently, there's a discrepancy in your background. It might delay your enlistment. What kind of discrepancy? Something about your family records. He opened the folder, scanning a page I couldn't read from where I was sitting. Your birth certificate doesn't match your current ID. There's a record of a previous address that doesn't line up with the one you listed, and your social security number might be connected to a different name, a deceased child, according to the system. I felt the calm I'd built over the past few weeks start to crack. I'd been so careful. I'd used my real name, my real address, my real history, but someone had gone into the system and changed things. Someone who wanted to make sure I couldn't enlist. We'll get to the bottom of this, Bennett said, but it might take some time. A few weeks, maybe longer. I nodded slowly, my mind already working through the implications. Is there anything I can do to help? Not at this stage. We'll contact you when we have more information. I walked out of the recruitment office with the sun on my face and a cold knot in my stomach. I knew exactly who'd done this. I'd suspected it might happen. I just hadn't known it would be so fast or so thorough. Richard or Nathaniel had used the family name to flag my application. They'd planted some kind of discrepancy in the records, something that would keep me from enlisting unless I came to them for help. It was a power play, a way to force me into their world by closing off every exit I had. I wasn't going to let that happen, but I also wasn't sure how to fight it. I was sitting on a crate in the back of the garage, trying to figure out my next move, when a delivery van pulled up to the shop. The driver came to the door holding a padded envelope. Collins, he asked. I took the package, confused. I wasn't expecting anything. The return address was a P.O. box, no name attached. I tore it open and found a single sheet of paper inside, typed no signature. Asterisk, call this number. I know who flagged your file, and I know how to fix it. Asterisk. Beneath the message was a phone number I didn't recognize. I turned the paper over, looking for any other clue, but it was blank. I stared at the number for a long time. This could be a trap. Richard could be trying to lure me into a meeting so he could pressure me in person. Or it could be something else entirely, someone with access to information I needed, someone who'd seen what was happening and decided to intervene. I reached for the phone on the garage wall and dialed. A woman's voice answered on the first ring. Hello. Who is this? A pause. Then, Tyler. I was wondering when you'd call. I'm a friend. Or, at least, I want to be. Who are you? I asked again. Someone who knows a little bit about what you're going through. Her voice was calm, measured, like she was used to being in control. I also know who's been messing with your enlistment file. And I think we should talk. I held the phone tighter. About what? About family, she said. About the people who want to control your life. And about what happens when you refuse. The line clicked. She'd hung up. I stood there in the dusty office, the phone still against my ear, and tried to remember if I'd ever heard that voice before. Something about it was familiar, but I couldn't place it. And then I realized it was the same woman I'd seen at the recruitment office 3 weeks ago, sitting in the waiting room with a file of her own. She glanced at me once, smiled briefly, and then gone back to her paperwork. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. People came and went from that office all day. But now I wondered, who was she, and what did she want from me? I spent the rest of the day staring at that phone number. The paper sat on the workbench, folded and unfolded so many times the crease was starting to tear. Ed asked me twice if I was okay. I told him I was fine, which was a lie, but it was the kind of lie you tell someone who's already done too much for you and doesn't need another reason to worry. By evening, I'd made up my mind. Whoever this woman was, she knew things I needed to know, and if she was setting a trap, I'd already survived worse traps. I'd survived Richard Collins. No, Richard Morgan, I reminded myself, trying to buy me off with guilt and money. I'd survived Nathaniel, or Vincent Reed, as I now knew he was called, trying to intimidate me. A mysterious phone call wasn't going to break me. I called the number back at 7 o'clock. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. I'll meet you, I said. Where and when? Pioneer Park, tomorrow at noon. The bench near the duck pond. Come alone. I always come alone. Good. A pause. And Tyler, bring the letter. The one your foster father wrote when you were 10. I felt my stomach drop. How do you know about that? I know a lot of things. See you tomorrow. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there with the phone in my hand, trying to remember the last time I'd thought about that letter. Ed had written it when I was 10, a simple affidavit stating that he'd found me abandoned and had raised me as his own. It wasn't a legal adoption. He'd never been able to afford the court fees, but it was the only document I had that proved I wasn't just some kid who'd wandered in off the street. I'd kept it in a shoebox under my cot for 10 years. I'd never shown it to anyone. How did she know? The next morning, I told Ed I had errands to run. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and handed me $5 for lunch. I took the bus to Pioneer Park, a sprawling patch of green in the middle of the city that I'd never had reason to visit before. The duck pond was at the far end, surrounded by old oak trees and benches that had been there since before I was born. She was already sitting on the bench when I arrived. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, wearing a plain jacket and jeans that looked expensive even from a distance. She held a coffee cup in both hands, watching the ducks paddle in lazy circles. I sat down next to her, keeping a foot of space between us. I'm here. She turned to look at me, and I got my first good view of her face. Sharp cheekbones, steady eyes, the kind of face that could be warm or cold depending on what she wanted you to see. Thank you for coming, she said. I know this is strange. My name is Natalia Carter. She extended a hand. I shook it briefly. And I know you're Tyler Morgan. I stiffened. My name's Tyler. That's it. No. Your legal name is Tyler Morgan. Your biological father is Richard Morgan. He's a colonel in the army, stationed at Fort Hamilton. Your biological mother is Natalie Carter. I interrupted. I know. I've already met them. They came to my garage last week. Natalia's eyebrows lifted. They found you? That's sooner than I expected. Richard must be more desperate than I thought. Desperate for what? She took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim. For control. For leverage. For the one thing he can't buy or intimidate his way into. I waited. She seemed like the kind of woman who would get to the point when she was ready, and pushing her would only make her take longer. Richard Morgan is a man who's built his entire career on appearances, she finally said. He has a perfect family, and a perfect wife, and a perfect son, except the son isn't his. Vincent Reed was adopted. Richard and Natalie were told their biological son died in the hospital 20 years ago. They grieved, they adopted Vincent, and they moved on. They built an empire around that story. But I didn't die. No, you were given to a foster agency, lost in the system for 6 years, and then found by Ed Foster, a man who never asked for a child but raised one anyway. She set her coffee down. Richard learned about you 3 months ago. A private investigator he hired to look into some old records discovered the truth, and now he's terrified. Of what? That his perfect narrative is going to unravel, that people will find out he abandoned his own son. That his career, his reputation, his access to power, all of it, could collapse if he refused to play along with his script. I thought about Richard's face when he'd stood in my garage, the way he told me I was being unreasonable, the way he'd threatened me with regret. Let me guess, I said. His script involves me coming back to the family, pretending everything's fine, and letting him save face. Exactly. He wants to present you as the prodigal son who returned willingly. He wants to control the narrative, and if you won't cooperate, he'll make sure you can't build a life outside of his shadow. You flagged my enlistment file. Natalia nodded. Richard has contacts in the military bureaucracy. He pulled strings to create a discrepancy in your background check. As long as that discrepancy exists, you can enlist. And as long as you can enlist, you're stuck. You can't get the training, the education, the career you want. You'll eventually have to come back to him. I leaned back on the bench. Processing this, IT was exactly what I'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. Richard Morgan was actively working against me. Not because he hated me. I didn't think he hated me, but because he saw me as a problem to be solved. Okay, I said. So, what do you want? Natalia smiled, and there was something sharp behind it. I want to help you, because Richard and I have unfinished business. He's my ex-husband's commanding officer. He ruined my husband's career 5 years ago over a petty dispute. He destroyed our family. I've been waiting for a chance to hit him where it hurts. And I'm that chance. You're the son he spent 20 years pretending doesn't exist. If you build a life outside of him, a military career, a reputation, a future he can't control, it undermines everything he's built. He can't claim to be a loving father if his real son wants nothing to do with him. He can't claim to be a man of integrity if he sabotaged that son's chances. I studied her face. She was telling the truth. I could see the resentment in her eyes, the old wound that hadn't healed, but she was also using me, and I didn't mind that. Everyone uses everyone. The important thing was whether our interests aligned. I need proof, I said. Proof that he flagged my file. Proof that I can take to the recruitment office to get my enlistment cleared. Natalia reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Everything you need is in here. Copies of the communications between Richard and the personnel officer who processed your background check. Dates, times, signatures. It's not enough to get him court-martialed. He was too careful for that, but it's enough to prove you're being targeted. The recruitment office will have to clear you. I took the envelope, weighing it in my hands. And what do you get out of this? Later, she said. When the time is right, I'll ask you for something. It won't be illegal. It won't hurt anyone innocent, but it will embarrass Richard Morgan. And that's all I want. I stood up, tucking the envelope inside my jacket. If this works, I'll owe you one. You'll owe me more than one, she said, and there was something almost playful in her voice. But I'm willing to wait. I went straight to the recruitment office that afternoon. Lieutenant Bennett was there, shuffling papers behind his desk. I laid the envelope in front of him and explained that I had evidence my background check had been tampered with. He looked at the documents, his expression shifting from skeptical to concerned to something close to angry. "These are internal military communications," he said, scanning the pages. "How did you get these?" "That's not relevant. What matters is that someone flagged my file deliberately. I'm not a security risk. I'm not a deserter. I'm just a kid who wants to serve his country, and someone in a position of power decided I wasn't allowed to." Bennett was quiet for a long moment. "I'll have to investigate this. It could take a few days." "Take as long as you need," I said. "But I'm not going to let some colonel's grudge keep me out of the military." He looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You're Richard Morgan's son, aren't you?" "I'm not his son. I'm Tyler Morgan. That's all." "Fair enough." He picked up the documents. "I'll make some calls. You'll hear from me by Friday." Friday came, and so did the call. My enlistment was cleared. The discrepancy had been resolved. I was to report to basic training in 2 weeks. I hung up the phone and sat on the cot in the back of the garage, feeling the weight of relief settle into my bones. I'd done it. I'd beaten Richard at his own game. Not through anger or aggression, but through patience and information. Ed came in, wiping his hands on his apron. "Good news." "I'm in," I said. 2 weeks. He nodded slowly, the way he did when he was trying not to show emotion. "Well, I guess I'd better teach you how to properly change a tire before you leave. Might be useful in the field." I laughed. "I've been changing tires since I was 12. Then you can help me finish the transmission on the Oldsmobile before you go. No excuses." The next few days were quiet. I worked on the Oldsmobile with Ed, took inventory of the parts we needed, and tried not to think about the future. Basic training would be hard. I knew that from my first life, but I was ready for it. I was stronger now, more focused. And this time, I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone except myself. On the 5th day, a black sedan pulled up to the garage. I recognized it immediately, Richard Morgan's car. And this time, he wasn't alone. Vincent Reed stepped out first. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His hair was disheveled, his shirt untucked, his eyes red-rimmed and angry. Behind him, Richard walked with the same measured authority as before, but there was a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there the first time. "Richard Collins? No." I reminded myself that his real name was Richard Morgan, and Vincent Reed was his adopted son, the one who'd taken my place. "Tyler," Richard said, stopping a few feet from the garage door. "We need to talk." "I'm working," I said, not looking up from the engine I was stripping. "Unless you're here to get your car fixed, I don't have time." Vincent stepped forward. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" His voice was shaking. "You think you can just walk into my life and take everything from me?" I set down my wrench and straightened up. "I'm not taking anything from you, Vincent. I don't want your life. I don't want your parents. I don't want your money. I just want to be left alone." Bullshit. He was standing in front of me now, his fists clenched. "You're playing the long game. You're going to expose me. You're going to tell everyone I'm not their real son." "Their real son is standing right here," I said quietly. "And I don't give a damn about exposing you. If I wanted to ruin your life, I could have done it the first day they came that I didn't. Because I don't care enough about you to bother." Vincent's face twisted. "You're lying." "I'm not lying. You're just having trouble believing that someone doesn't want what you have." Richard stepped in, putting a hand on Vincent's shoulder. "Son, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." Vincent shrugged him off. "He's going to destroy everything we've built. And you're just standing there letting him." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned to me. "Tyler, I'll admit it. I tried to block your enlistment. IT was wronged. I was trying to protect my family, but you've proven you're determined. So I'll withdraw my objections. You can join the military, but in exchange, I need you to sign a document." "A document." "An agreement you'll acknowledge that Vincent is my legal heir. You'll waive any claim to the family estate. And you'll stay away from the media. No interviews, no public statements about your childhood. And in return, I'll make sure your military career goes smoothly. I have connections that I can help you." I stared at him for a long moment. He thought he was making an offer. He thought he was being generous. "Let me make something clear," I said slowly. "I don't want your estate. I don't want your connections. That I don't want your help. And I don't need your permission to serve my country. I've already been cleared. The military knows about your interference. If you try anything else, I'll make that information public." Richard's face went pale. "You wouldn't." "I would. I've got nothing to lose, Richard. You've got everything to lose. Here's my counteroffer. Stay away from me. Stay out of my life. Stop trying to control me. And I'll never mention your name to anyone, deal?" The silence stretched between us. Vincent was staring at his father, waiting for a response. Richard's hands were trembling slightly, the first sign of weakness I'd ever seen from him. "You're making a mistake," he finally said. "You don't understand how the world works. People like us, we need each other. You can't do this alone." "Watch me," I said. He turned away, pulling Vincent with him. "We're done here," he said. "But I'll be watching you, Tyler. And when you fail, and you will fail, don't come crawling back." "I won't." They got back into the sedan and drove away. I stood in the garage doorway, watching them disappear down the street, and felt nothing but relief. IT was over. I'd drawn my line in the sand, and they'd backed down. For now. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus heading to Fort Jackson. Ed stood at the door, his eyes wet despite his best efforts to hide it. "You call me when you get there," he said. "And don't forget to write. Even if you don't think you have anything to say, just write something." "I will," I said. "And I'm coming back when I'm done. You're not getting rid of me that easy." He pulled me into a brief, fierce hug, the kind we'd never really done before. "Be safe," he muttered. "And don't let those drill sergeants break you. I've survived worse." He let me go, and I climbed onto the bus. I found a seat by the window, looking back at the garage until it was just a blur in the distance. I was alone again, but this time I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The bus rumbled onto the highway, and I pulled out my orders, reading them again just to remind myself this was real. Basic training, advanced infantry, and eventually, if I earned it, special forces. I was going to build something for myself. Not because I had something to prove to Richard Morgan or Vincent Reed or anyone else, because I wanted to. Because this body, this second chance, deserved to be used for something meaningful. I closed my eyes and let the motion of the bus carry me forward. 2 hours into the trip, the bus pulled into a rest stop. I got out to stretch my legs, and that's when I saw her. She was standing by a vending machine, wearing civilian clothes, a small smile on her face. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd cut her hair short, and she looked different than she had in the recruitment office. It was Natalia Carter, the woman from the park. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't her at all. This woman was younger, sharper, with a kind of fierce energy that Natalia didn't have. She was also holding a coffee cup with the same two-handed grip. "Hi," she said. "Tyler Morgan, right? I'm Vanessa. Vanessa Parker." I stopped. "How do you know my name?" "Lucky guess." She smiled. "Actually, I've been doing some digging. I'm a friend of Natalia's. She asked me to keep an eye on you. Said you might need backup." "Backup?" She shrugged. "I'm starting basic training tomorrow, too. Same company, I think. She figured you could use someone in your corner." "You're joining the military?" "Army Med Corps. I'm a nurse. Or I will be, once I finish training." She extended her hand. "So, partners?" I shook her hand, more confused than before. Why would Natalia do this? She said, "You're the only person who's ever made Richard Morgan sweat." Vanessa's grin widened. And honestly, that's enough for me. The bus arrived at Fort Jackson at 0300 hours, and I stepped off into a world of floodlights and shouting. It was the same chaos I remembered from my first life. The screaming drill sergeants, the confusion, the teenage recruits scrambling to find their formations. But this time, I knew the game. I'd played it before, and I knew exactly how to win. The first week was a blur of physical conditioning and sleep deprivation. We ran until our legs gave out, did push-ups until our arms couldn't hold us, and stood in formation for inspections that felt more like medieval torture than modern military training. I'd done all of this before, but my body was 20 years younger and infinitely more capable. I took to it like I'd been born for it. The other recruits noticed, and I could see it in the way they looked at me during the runs. When everyone else was gasping for air, I was still breathing steady. When they were collapsing after the obstacle course, I was already moving to the next station that I wasn't trying to show off, that I was just trying to survive in my own way. But that kind of performance attracts attention, and not all of it was welcome. "Private Morgan." Drill Sergeant Mitchell barked on day 4. "Report to my office. Now." I double-timed it to the supply shed they used as an office, my heart steady. I already knew what this was going to be about. The first time around, I'd gotten pulled aside for attitude problems when I refused to bow to a senior officer's whims. This time felt similar. Mitchell was a grizzled man in his 40s, with a chest full of medals and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. He sat behind a metal desk, a file open in front of him. My file. "Close the door," he said. I did. "You've got an interesting history, Private Morgan," Mitchell said, tapping the file. "Foster care, auto mechanic. And then you appear out of nowhere, pass your ASFOB with flying colors, and suddenly you're here, outrunning every man in your platoon. You want to tell me what that's about?" "Sir, I've been working physical jobs my whole life. I've got decent stamina. That's all." "Decent stamina?" He snorted. "You ran a 2-mile in under 11 minutes. That's not decent. That's exceptional, and your rifle qualification scores are in the top 1%. You've never held a weapon before basic training, and suddenly you're a marksman?" I kept my face neutral. "I have good hand-eye coordination, drill sergeant, and I practice." Mitchell leaned back, studying me. "I've been in the Army for 23 years, that I know talent when I see it, but I also know something else. I've been getting phone calls. From people who don't want to be named, people who say you're a troublemaker to a security risk, someone I should keep an eye on." My stomach tightened. Richard was at it again, not through official channels, but through informal influence. Enough to make a drill sergeant suspicious, but not enough to prove anything. "With respect, sir," I said carefully, "people who make anonymous phone calls don't usually have my best interests at heart. I'm here to serve. That's all I want." Mitchell stared at me for a long moment. "You know, most recruits would be shaking by now. You're not. That tells me something." He closed the file. "Here's what's going to happen, Morgan. You're going to keep performing. You're going to keep your head down. And if I find any evidence that you're a problem, I'll be on you like a boot on a cockroach. Understood?" "Yes, drill sergeant." Dismissed. I saluted and left, my mind already working through the implications. The anonymous calls were Richard's work. He couldn't stop me from enlisting, but he could try to poison the well. Make my life miserable, make me quit. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Vanessa Parker was in my company, like she'd promised. She'd been assigned to the medical platoon, but our training overlapped frequently. She'd show up at mealtimes, sitting at my table, chatting like we were old friends. On the 5th night, she cornered me after dinner. "That drill sergeant has it out for you," she said, keeping her voice low. "I've seen the way he watches you, like he's waiting for you to screw up. Someone's been making calls about me, trying to make my life difficult." "Richard Morgan?" "I assume so." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "Natalia told me he was ruthless, but I didn't think he'd go this far." "Natalia sent you here to watch me. Why?" She looked at me with something approaching guilt. "She wanted me to make sure you got through this. She has, let's call it a long-term investment in your success. But I'm also here because I genuinely want to help, that I know what it's like to have powerful people trying to shut you down." "What's your story?" She hesitated. My father was a contractor who worked for Richard Morgan's company. Morgan refused to pay him for a job. My father sued, and Morgan dragged it out for years until my father went bankrupt. He died of a heart attack during the trial. I was 17. I absorbed that. You've got reason to hate him. I've got reason to want to see him fall, she corrected. But I'm not stupid. I'm not going to do anything reckless. I'm just going to be here doing my job and making sure you don't get crushed by his weight. That's enough, I said. More than enough. She nodded once and walked away. I sat there, watching her retreat, and wondered if I was making allies or just collecting debts I'd have to pay later. Week 2 brought the first real test, the final qualification course. It was a week-long exercise designed to simulate combat conditions. We'd be evaluated on everything: navigation, marksmanship, physical endurance, and tactical decision-making. The top performers would be selected for advanced infantry training. The bottom would be reassigned to support roles. I wasn't going to be bottom. The course started at 0400 with a 10-mile ruck march. I paced myself, running with the middle of the pack, conserving energy for the later stages. By midday, we'd reached the marksmanship range, and I posted the highest score in the company. Mitchell didn't say anything, but I caught him watching me with a grudging respect. That night, we were given a written exam on field tactics. I'd studied the manuals obsessively, and I finished the test in 40 minutes. The instructors pulled me aside to verify my answers. They were all correct. On day 3, we conducted a night navigation exercise, a 20-mile movement through dense forest using only map and compass. I navigated by the stars, something I'd learned in my first life, and arrived at the objective point 2 hours ahead of the second-place finisher. By day 4, I was at the top of the company's ranking, and that's when the hammer came down. Mitchell called me into his office again, but this time he wasn't alone. There was another man there, a captain with a hard face and a vaguely familiar look. He introduced himself as Captain Bennett. The same name as the lieutenant who'd handled my enlistment. Coincidence? I doubted it. Private Morgan, Captain Bennett said, I've been reviewing your file. Impressive performance. But there's a concern. Sir, your scores are unusually high for a recruit with no prior military experience. It's raised some questions. Were you given any advanced knowledge of the course material? I felt my composure crack for just a moment. They were accusing me of cheating, not just being a troublemaker, being a fraud. No, sir. Everything I've done here has been my own effort. Captain Bennett exchanged a glance with Mitchell. We'll be reviewing your performance closely. In the meantime, your assignments are being adjusted. What kind of adjustment? You're being reassigned to administrative support for the remainder of basic training. It's a precautionary measure while we investigate. I stared at him. Administrative support, desk work. They were pulling me from the field, effectively killing any chance I had at advanced infantry selection. It was sabotage, pure and simple. I looked at Mitchell. He was staring at the floor, not meeting my eyes. He didn't like this, but he was following orders. May I ask who initiated this review? I said, keeping my voice steady. Captain Bennett's expression hardened. That's not your concern, Private. With respect, sir, I think it is. Someone's been making anonymous calls about me since I arrived. I've been targeted from day 1. And now, just when I'm about to finish this course. I said that's enough. Bennett stood. You're dismissed. Report to administrative headquarters at 0800 tomorrow. That's an order. I saluted and walked out, my blood boiling. This was Richard's work, not directly, but through intermediaries. He'd found a way to derail me without leaving fingerprints. Vanessa was waiting outside. What happened? They're benching me. Administrative support. I've been flagged for investigation. Investigation for what? Cheating, they think, because my scores are too good. Vanessa's face darkened. That's ridiculous. You're not cheating. You're just that good. Tell them that. I started walking toward the barracks. I'm not going to let this stop me. I'm going to finish basic training. I'm going to fight this. Tyler. I don't need help. I need to think. The next morning, I reported to administrative headquarters, signed in, and was assigned to a filing room. I spent 8 hours alphabetizing paperwork. It was a humiliating punishment for a crime I hadn't committed. But I used the time to think. If Richard could reach a captain, he had more influence than I'd accounted for. I needed to find a counterweight, someone higher up who could protect me, someone who had reason to want Richard to fail. And I knew exactly who to call. That night, I used a pay phone at the base exchange and dialed the number Natalia had left for emergencies. She answered on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call. They're trying to bench me. Administrative reassignment. I need to get back in the field, or I lose my chance at advanced training. Who's the officer in charge? Captain Bennett. He's the one who initiated the review. A pause. I know him. He owes Richard a favor. I can't get him to reverse his decision, but I can do something better. I can get you a direct audience with someone above him, Colonel Thompson. He's Richard's rival. They've clashed over budget allocations for years. If you can impress Thompson, he'll overrule Bennett. How do I get an audience with Thompson? You'll have your chance. There's a field exercise next week, a battalion level test. Thompson is the evaluator. If you can participate in that exercise and perform well, he'll notice. But you need to be there. I'm currently assigned to a filing room. Leave the filing room to me. I'll make a call. Expect a change in orders by tomorrow evening. The line went dead. The next day, I was called back to Mitchell's office. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Private Morgan, your reassignment has been rescinded. You're returning to your unit effective immediately. I kept my face neutral. Thank you, Drill Sergeant. Mitchell studied me. I don't know who you know, Morgan, but someone with a lot of influence just called down here, but I'm not going to ask what happened. But I'll tell you this, that field exercise is coming up. If you want a spot, you'd better prove you deserve it. I will. He nodded slowly, dismissed. I left the office and found Vanessa waiting outside. How did you do it? She asked. I have a friend, a powerful one. She didn't ask more, but I could see the question in her eyes. Who and why and what did it cost? I didn't have answers to those questions. Not yet. The field exercise was brutal. A 2-day simulated combat operation with night movements, live fire scenarios, and physical challenges designed to break the weak. I pushed myself harder than I'd ever pushed before. I used every trick I'd learned in my first life: terrain association, camouflage, stealth movement. I led my squad to the objective point faster than any other team, and we secured the target without a single casualty. At the end of the exercise, Colonel Thompson called me forward. He was a tall, lean man with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at my scores, then at me. Private Morgan, he said, these are extraordinary numbers. You've outperformed every other recruit in this exercise. Thank you, sir. I understand there was a question about your performance, some concern about your background. I didn't flinch. There were concerns, sir. They were unfounded. Thompson nodded slowly. I've made some inquiries. It seems someone has been taking an unusual interest in your career, someone with access to high-level contacts. I said nothing. I knew Thompson was giving me an opening, but I wasn't sure how to take it. Whatever's happening, Thompson said, I don't like people interfering with my training. You've earned your spot. Morgan, you'll be selected for advanced infantry training. No more administrative reassignments. Thank you, sir. He held my gaze for a moment longer. And if anyone tries to interfere again, you come to me. I don't take kindly to political games on my watch. I saluted and walked away, feeling the weight of Richard's influence lift just slightly. I'd found a shield, and I'd need it. Vanessa caught up with me after the ceremony. You did it, she said. You're in. I'm in. I looked at her, but this isn't over. Richard's going to try something else. He's not the kind of man who accepts losing. I know. Natalia warned me. She paused. There's something else I should tell you about your real mother. Amanda? What about her? She's not the innocent victim Richards made her out to be. She knew you were alive. She signed the papers herself. She chose to let you go to foster care. Richard wanted to keep looking, but she convinced him you were dead. She wanted a clean break. I felt my world tilt slightly. I'd always imagined Amanda as the sympathetic one, the mother who'd grieved for a lost son, but if Vanessa was telling the truth, she'd lied to Richard. She'd ended the search. Why? I asked. Why would she do that? I don't know, but you might want to find out before you decide who's the enemy and who's not. I stood there in the twilight, the noise of the base fading around me, and tried to process this new information. Amanda had been the one who'd sold me out. She'd made Richard believe I was dead, so she could move on with her life. And Richard, the man I'd assumed was my enemy, had wanted to keep looking. It changed everything, and nothing at all. I walked back to the barracks, my head spinning, and realized that this war I'd been fighting was more complicated than I'd ever imagined.